Kvod Rabbanim, Morai v'Rabotai, my dear professors, ladies and gentlemen. Before I speak about the subject of Spinoza, allow me to give you an outline, a short introduction with regard to the herem. First, when was a herem enacted? To put someone in herem was quite common in Talmudic times and even after the Talmud had been sealed. If a person was seen breaking the laws of the Torah or even rabbinic laws, deprecating or degrading them publicly and willfully, he was put in herem so that the rest of the community should not follow his bad example. For instance, in the Babylonian Talmud tractate Psachim, page 52, we learn that someone who did not keep the second day of Yom Tov was put in herem. In the Babylonian Talmud tractate Megillah, a famous rabbi by the name Rav put someone in herem for working on Purim. In tractate Berachot, page 19, someone who has eaten his meal without netilat yadai, without washing his hands, was put in herem. There are many more enumerated in Maimonides' section Talmud Torah. The second point I would like to give you as an introduction, what does herem entail? According to the Halacha, according to the Jewish law, when a person was put into a herem, no one is allowed to sit, eat, or drink with him. He should not be counted for a minyan. The Beit Din, the Jewish court, is authorized not to circumcise his sons. When he dies, he should not be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Similarly, Maimonides states that if a person denies God's existence or says that the Torah, which was given by God, is not divine, or he says that even one verse of the Torah has been added by Moses, he has no share in the world to come. Having mentioned all this, I would like to add that the Halacha, the Jewish law, is clear. A herem is usually imposed for 30 days. And after this time, the herem should be annulled by the Beit Din, by the Jewish court. The individual who had been placed in a herem once again becomes part and parcel of the community of Israel. However, the herem is annulled only if he comes before the Beit Din and asks for forgiveness and does repentance by retracting publicly the sin he committed or the wrong he said about God and Judaism. May I emphasize that then and only then, when the individual comes before the Beit Din, then and only then the herem is annulled. Having briefly covered examples relating to the herem, what herem entails in its halacha, let us now turn to our subject of Spinoza. In the 17th century, the Av Beit Din, the president of the court of Amsterdam, was Rabbi Saul Shaul Mortera. He and his Beit Din, he and his rabbis, felt the need to impose a herem on Baruch Spinoza. But why? What was the reason? To answer this question, we must consider the context of the period. The Spanish and Portuguese Jews had come from the Iberian Peninsula and settled in Amsterdam. Many of them were raised in Spain and Portugal as Catholics. Many of them were forced to adopt Christianity, and Rabbi Mortera and his Beth Din had the gigantic task of re-educating them in the Torah and Judaism, and above all to believe in the unity of God and not in the concept of the Trinity. In other words, the belief in the monotheism, the belief in the unity of God, the belief in the oneness of God. In simple terms, the belief of Shema Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. In this context, that Spinoza came along and threatened to destroy the cohesion of the community. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine for one moment how his views contaminated the impressionable minds of the younger generation. Whilst Rabbi Saul Mortera and his Beth Din were explaining the principles of the Torah and inspiring the community to come back to God and to Judaism, on the other hand, Spinoza tried to spread heretical views. To Spinoza, the law of Moses was not divine and no longer relevant after the destruction of the Jewish state. It is clear he was spreading his views and even teaching others. Most likely, he put some of his views in writing. Rabbi Mortera and his rabbis, having known of the heretical opinions and acts of Spinoza, endeavored by various means to turn him away from his mistaken ways. But unfortunately, their attempts failed to encourage him to mend his ways. Meanwhile, they received continuing reports from the worsening heresies which he practiced and taught. Indeed, we learn from the text of the herem that numerous trustworthy witnesses testified against Spinoza. Thus, to prevent people learning from his views, the Chachamim had no choice but to expel him from the community and to put him in herem. Having said all this, one question remains in mind. Why was the herem not lifted during Spinoza's lifetime? After all, as I have said before, a herem is lifted after 30 days. I also ask myself, why was Spinoza buried in a non-Jewish cemetery and not in Ouderkerk, our Jewish cemetery? It seems to me beyond any shadow of doubt. Spinoza never requested to rescind the herem. Most likely, he did not care one way or the other, and he probably even laughed at the whole concept of the herem and laughed at the rabbis who imposed it. The fact, too, that he had been buried in a non-Jewish cemetery shows clearly that to the last breath of his life, he was indifferent to the herem, and that he did not ask for forgiveness or repentance by retracting publicly what he had said about God and his contempt for the divinity of the Torah and the Talmud. And now, ladies and gentlemen, taking into consideration all what I have said, on what grounds, halachically speaking, might we be allowed to rescind the herem? Surely, if we are to leave the herem, this would clearly imply that we share the views of Spinoza and see no problem with them. views which state that God does not exist, except in a philosophical sense, and that the law of Moses is no longer relevant. How then can we remove the herem from a person who had ideas that tear apart the very foundation of our religion? Ladies and gentlemen, what is left of our heritage and tradition to pass on to our children if even Shema Israel, Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem Echad is nullified? Ladies and gentlemen, there are those who believe that it is important to rescind the herem in order to send a strong global message that modern orthodoxy combines religion and freedom of speech. Surely, if freedom of speech means to study the views of Spinoza, every one of us is already free to do so, as his books are freely available. Indeed, we sell them in our winkel, in our shop in the Snocha. And I have never objected to that. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, the Torah has always encouraged freedom of expression, the open exchange of opinions and views in a spirit of tolerance, understanding the pivotal role this plays in strengthening the vitality of beliefs. But even freedom of speech has its boundaries, has its limitations. Modern academics have debated and explored this reality in many works to date, agreeing that there is a need to strike a balance between the right to freedom of expression and the harm that might result from certain speech. Our rabbis, many hundreds of years ago, understood exactly the needs of this principle of balance. It is obvious to any thinking individual that freedom of speech does not mean that even in our own synagogues we must spread the denial of God's existence and harm and destroy our own heritage. At this point, I'd just like to add that every rabbi is duty-bound to do kiruv rechokim, to approach those who have gone astray, and to try to bring them closer to our faith. Although we do not stop anybody from worshiping with us in the Snocha, irrespective of their views, nevertheless, it is the duty of every rabbi to bring people closer to God and to value what Judaism stands for. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, my own opinion is that we should leave Spinoza's herem as it is. And by doing so, we will give a message to world Jewry or to the whole world that we are here to uphold our ancient faith which we have received from God on Mount Sinai. Thank you.